What is up, guys, and welcome back to 100Proof Official. Today we're going to take a quick break in our build and just talk tech with you guys for a little bit about LMAs and how to replace them.
Yeah, so this is my 96 Integra. It has a B20VTEC in it. It has a B16A head. Now these B16A heads have the old style LMAs in them, which are known to be very noisy. They stick up a lot. So it's probably just a good measure to go ahead and tear into this head and replace them. And we're going to show you exactly how to do so.
All right, now there's a couple of things you might not have laying around in your toolbox. A couple of things I want to talk to you about before we get started. Number one, you're going to need an M5 bolt. That's your standard run-of-the-mill M5 bolt that any hardware store is going to have. If you're feeling dangerous or if you're in a pinch, if you really just absolutely have to have one, you can't find one, you can take one out of your distributor cap and use that for what we're going to do. The second thing is an M10 or 10mm Allen wrench. So you're going to have that. And then the last thing that I want to talk to you about is make sure you set this thing at top dead center. It's always a good idea to set it up that way before you start tearing your motor apart. Sometimes it can help with the reassembly. Oh, and zip ties or rubber bands. Those are going to come in handy. I know you've got zip ties laying around, but we'll show you why coming up. All right, guys, so we're just gonna jump right into it, and we're not gonna bore you with the disassembly step by step. You guys know how to take your valve cover off and your distributor and your VTEC solenoid. Of course, we just lift our timing belt off. So once you get to this point, you're gonna remove the 12mm bolts that are on the cam rail, and then you're gonna have some bolts on the end that take a 10mm socket. So once you get all those loose, you can remove them and set them to the side. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about with the cam rails removed, it's not going to be the end of the world if you mix them up. They're actually exactly the same. They are identical. You may have different oil stains on the bottoms because as you can see here on the cam caps, the oiling ports are different, but the actual rails themselves are exactly the same. So if you mix those up, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so on to the actual removal of the cam caps themselves. So they've got dowel pins on the bottom, and ours have already been removed and popped off, but the first time you remove yours, they're probably gonna be stuck on there pretty good. So a good idea, if you've got a deadbolt hammer, is to use that. But if you don't, you can use the handle of your wooden hammer, fiberglass hammer, anything that's gonna be a little bit softer on break and loose these guys, and you're just gonna wanna tap on them and get them, start to rock back and forth, and you're just gonna continue to rock them and pull upward, and they're eventually just gonna pop right out. Now, all of these are individually numbered. Okay, so they've got exhaust 1, and then they've got a 2, this one's got a 3, 4, and then you've got these are numbered 5 exhaust, 5 intake, and if you look, they've actually got arrows. All of the arrows must be pointing towards the cam gears, and we'll touch on that again once we start putting this thing back together. Okay, so the cam caps are removed and the cam shafts are removed, and of course the cam shafts are going to be really, really hard to mess up because one shaft has got a cutout on this side for your distributor. So that's going to be super easy going back together. Now we're going to talk about how to remove your rockers to give us access to the LMAs. This is where our M5 bolt comes into play. Now all you're going to do is screw it into the top of the orifice, and then you'll need pliers to just gently kind of wiggle it back and forth and pull it right out of there. Boom, look at that. Boom, 2 for 2. So now it's time to remove the plug from the distributor side of the cylinder head, and this is where you're going to need your M10 Allen wrench. So the shafts that the rockers ride on are actually threaded for the Honda fine pitch M12 bolts. And if you've got those, you can just simply thread them in and pull the shafts out. Now, if you don't have an M12 bolt handy, you will need to remove these two plugs. That way you've got access to the shafts and you can actually push them out towards the passenger side. Now grab a rag because there's definitely gonna be oil in the head when you pull those out. All right, so what we're gonna start with is just an M12 bolt. This is like an OEM style pitch that Honda would use just to mount the transmission to the engine. So we're gonna thread those in, and that's gonna allow us to pull the shafts off that the rockers ride on. Now, up until this point, the only thing that really is gonna matter as far as location goes is which orifice went from where. Everything else that we've pulled off so far is either identical or it's clearly marked so it can go back together. Once we start pulling these shafts out and these sets of rockers, we're gonna wanna make sure that we set things up and we stay organized. That way everything can go back in the car the same way that it came out. So there is the intake side. And of course, we're just gonna put it over here and set it like it would be if we were viewing the motor. We'll do the same thing with the exhaust. Same deal, just set it up just like this. That way nothing can get mixed up or misplaced. Now it's time to pull these rockers. All right, so Nate's got our first set of rockers out, and he's zip tied them together so we are not gonna lose orientation or forget where they went, because we're gonna set them up on our cart here. Now there are pins that will fall out if you tip these over and you're not careful, so that is something you definitely do not wanna lose. So just kind of be mindful of that as you're setting these all in place. So we've got all the rockers pulled, everything's organized. Now we can finally see those lost motion assemblies in there. And really all you're gonna wanna do is grab a hold of them and they will actually just slide right out. There we go. All right, so after a little bit of a delay, some shipping stuff, we finally got our Skunk2 lost motion assemblies. So let's open these up and give you guys a side-by-side comparison of these versus the old ones. And let's get this car back together. Let's do it. All right, so what we've got here is the OEM LMA on the right versus the Skunk2 LMA over here. Now, as you can see, these are very different. The OEM part is like a hydraulic unit, and the Skunk2 unit is more like a progressive spring with a hardened nose. Now, Honda actually revised these part numbers to be more like a progressive spring type unit. So there was obviously a pretty serious problem with these LMAs, and Honda actually noticed and did something about it. So that is definitely encouraging, and part of the reason why we want to just go ahead and get these OEM lost motion assemblies knocked out. All right, so now the reassembly, and to actually install your new lost motion assemblies, all 8 of them just simply slide down into the hole. And once you've got those down, just put a dab of assembly lube or motor oil on the nose just to help aid during startup. So now onto the installation of the rods that the rockers ride on. Now before you install these, you just want to make sure that they're free of any debris, and you actually want to coat them just with a light film of engine oil. Another thing to be mindful of is the hole at the end where the orifice goes. I would recommend starting with that straight up. It may not be perfect once you get it all the way installed, but it's gonna be pretty close, and that's really all you want at this point. You're gonna install it to where you can see that it's almost flush with where the rockers go. And then you're gonna install the rockers kind of one at a time, and you're gonna have to do some minor adjusting to get that rod through all 3 of them. And you'll just repeat that same process for each set of rockers on both sides. So now that we've got the rocker arms installed, we're actually just gonna put a light film of assembly lube on where the rockers are gonna contact the cams, as well as where the cam's gonna sit. And then over to this side, we're going to put a little bit of Honda Bond for the actual cam seal here on this end behind the cam gear. As we're reinstalling these cam caps, you're gonna want to make sure that these arrows are all pointing towards the cam gears, and we're going to be marked I for intake and E for exhaust. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, it's cheap insurance just to go through and double check all your caps and make sure those arrows are pointing towards the gears. This is very crucial. Because as you can see, these ports here that actually carry oil throughout the cylinder head, if one of these caps is on backwards, it's going to block that flow of oil. And we've actually seen motors lock up because of this. So this is very important. Just take a minute before you put the rails on, before you torque everything down, and double check all your arrows on your caps. We've got the cams in here, and they're sitting about as close as we could get to top dead center, since we know the bottom end is there. As we start torquing down these rails, it's gonna actually depress some valves. So it's always a good idea to just get as close as you can to top dead center, and then once everything gets torqued down, we'll rotate it over, put this thing back in time. Alright guys, well that pretty much concludes our how-to for the LMA install. Aside from this, you just want to put your motor back in time, put your distributor and VTEC solenoid cover back on, and be sure and double check your oil in case you lost any, pulling those plugs out.
Absolutely, and if you guys like what you saw here, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, and be sure to check out our next episode and see what we're getting into next.